Ethan Price wiped the sweat from his forehead as he maneuvered his salvage ship through the twisted maze of dead metal. The Arcturus machine graveyard stretched endlessly in all directions, a silent monument to the great expansion wars that had ended 2 centuries ago. Thousands of destroyed warships floated here, their hulls torn open and their crews long gone. Most salvagers avoided this place. The radiation was dangerous and old defense systems sometimes woke up without warning. But Ethan needed the money, and the graveyard still held valuable technology for those brave enough to search for it. Beside him in the cockpit, Sentinel stood perfectly still. The combat robot was 15 years old, built during the last years of the war. Its metal body was scarred and dented from countless battles, but its sensors were still sharp. Ethan had bought Sentinel at a military surplus auction 5 years ago. The robot was supposed to be just another tool, but over time they had become something more. They were partners. Sentinel had saved his life more times than he could count. "Anything out there?" Ethan asked as he guided the ship around a massive chunk of a destroyed carrier. Sentinel's optical sensors flickered. "Scanning. Multiple debris fields ahead. Radiation levels are elevated but manageable." "Wait." The robot's head turned sharply to the left. "I am detecting an unusual energy signature." Ethan sat up straighter. "What kind of energy?" "Unknown. The pattern is unlike anything in my database. It is very faint but consistent. The source appears to be approximately 3 kilometers deeper into the graveyard." Ethan felt his heart beat faster. Unknown energy signatures could mean many things. Sometimes they were just old reactors still burning after all these years. Sometimes they were unexploded weapons. But sometimes, very rarely, they were something valuable. Something worth the risk. "Can you pinpoint the exact location?" he asked. Sentinel processed the data for several seconds. "Yes. The signal is coming from beneath a large cluster of wreckage. Preliminary scans suggest multiple ship hulls stacked on top of each other. The energy source is buried deep." Ethan thought about it. Digging through layers of destroyed ships was dangerous work. One wrong move could trigger a collapse or set off old explosives. But he had been doing this for 5 years. He knew how to be careful. And that energy signature was too interesting to ignore. "All right," he said finally. "Let's go take a look." He piloted the salvage ship carefully through the debris field. All around them, broken pieces of humanity's past floated silently. He saw the remains of fighters and cruisers, supply ships and destroyers. Some were burned black. Others were torn in half by weapons that no longer existed. The war had been brutal, and this graveyard was proof of how many had died. As they got closer, Sentinel's sensors began providing more information. "The energy signature is growing stronger. The pattern suggests some kind of power generation, but the technology is unfamiliar. I am also detecting traces of materials not found in human ship construction." Ethan's hands tightened on the controls. "Not human? You mean alien?" "That is a possibility," Sentinel replied calmly. "However, I cannot confirm without closer examination. Humanity had encountered several alien species during the expansion into space. Some were friendly. Others were hostile. The wars had been fought against both human rebels and alien raiders. But most alien technology had been studied and catalogued. If this was something truly unknown, it could be incredibly valuable." They reached the location Sentinel had identified. What Ethan saw made him whistle softly. A massive pile of wreckage rose before them like a metal mountain. Dozens of ships had been destroyed in the same place, their remains falling on top of each other over the years. The tangle of metal and debris was at least a kilometer wide. "The energy source is beneath all of that?" Ethan asked. "Affirmative. Approximately 200 meters below the surface layer of wreckage." Ethan rubbed his jaw, thinking. This would take days, maybe weeks. He would need to carefully cut away the outer layers, constantly checking for instability. One mistake could bring the whole pile down on top of him. But the energy signature was still pulsing steadily. Whatever was down there had been working for a very long time. "What do you think, Sentinel? Is it worth the risk?" The robot turned its head to look at him. "I cannot make that determination. The potential reward is unknown. However, I will assist you regardless of your decision." Ethan smiled slightly. That was Sentinel's way of saying yes. The old robot would never abandon him, no matter how dangerous things got. They had been through too much together. "All right then," Ethan said. "Let's get to work." Over the next 3 days they began the slow process of excavation. Ethan used his ship's cutting laser to slice through hull plating and support beams. Sentinel scanned continuously, warning him when a section was about to collapse or when radiation levels spiked. They worked 12 hours each day, then retreated to a safe distance to rest. The work was exhausting. The cutting laser overheated regularly, forcing them to take breaks. Twice, Ethan had to dodge falling debris when a section gave way unexpectedly. Once, Sentinel detected an active mine buried in the wreckage and they spent 4 hours carefully disarming it. But slowly, steadily they dug deeper. On the 4th day everything changed. Ethan was cutting through what he thought was another destroyer hull when his laser suddenly punched through into empty space. He stopped immediately and pulled back. "Sentinel, I just broke through to something. Can you scan it?" The robot moved closer, its sensors working intensely. After a moment, it spoke and Ethan heard something unusual in its voice. Almost like surprise. "Ethan, you need to see this. The hull material beneath us is not made from any known alloy. The structure is intact, not damaged like the surrounding wreckage. And the energy signature is coming from directly below. I believe we have found the source." Ethan felt electricity run through his body. He carefully widened the hole he had made, shining his ship's lights down into the darkness below. What he saw made him catch his breath. Metal. Smooth, dark metal that seemed to absorb the light. He could see the curve of a massive hull, far larger than any of the destroyed ships around it. And along that hull, faint lines of blue light pulsed in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. "That's not human," Ethan whispered. "That's not anything I've ever seen before." "Confirmed?" Sentinel said quietly. "We have discovered something significant." Ethan stared down at the mysterious ship, his mind racing. Whatever this vessel was, it had been here for a very long time, buried and forgotten. But it was still alive. Still pulsing with power. Still waiting. He made his decision. "We're going inside." It took another full day to clear enough debris to reach the airlock. Ethan worked carefully, his hands steady despite his excitement. Sentinel stood guard nearby, sensors scanning constantly for any danger. The mysterious ship sat silent beneath them, its blue lights pulsing in that strange, steady rhythm. When Ethan finally exposed the airlock door, he stopped to stare at it. The design was completely foreign. The door was oval instead of round, and covered in symbols he had never seen before. They looked almost like writing, but the shapes were too complex and flowing to be anything human. "Sentinel, can you identify these symbols?" he asked. The robot moved closer, its optical sensors focusing on the markings. "Negative. The symbols do not match any known language in my database, including all recorded alien scripts. This is something entirely new." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He had been salvaging for 5 years and had seen technology from a dozen different species. But this was different. This was something humanity had never encountered before. He found what looked like a control panel next to the door. It was dark and dead, but when he touched it, the surface suddenly lit up with soft blue light. Ethan jerked his hand back in surprise. "The ship is responding to physical contact," Sentinel observed. "It appears to still have power." Ethan touched the panel again, more carefully this time. Symbols appeared on the glowing surface, shifting and changing. He had no idea what they meant, but after a moment he heard a deep grinding sound. The airlock door began to open. "Stay alert," Ethan told Sentinel as he drew his sidearm. "We don't know what's in there." The door slid open completely, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Ethan clicked on his helmet light and stepped through. Sentinel followed close behind, weapon systems armed and ready. The moment they crossed the threshold, lights began to activate throughout the corridor. They were soft and blue, nothing like the harsh white lights of human ships. The walls were smooth and curved, made from that same dark metal that absorbed light. And there was gravity. Ethan could feel it pulling at him, steady and normal. "I am detecting atmosphere," Sentinel reported. "Oxygen, nitrogen, and trace elements. The composition is similar to Earth standard. The air is breathable." Ethan checked his own scanner and confirmed it. Against all logic, this ancient ship still had life support running. He carefully removed his helmet and took a breath. The air was cool and clean with a faint metallic taste. "How is this possible?" he wondered aloud. "This ship has been buried here for decades, maybe centuries. How can it still have power?" "Unknown," Sentinel replied. "But the energy signature is stronger inside. The source appears to be deeper in the ship, toward what I estimate is the central section." They moved forward slowly. The corridor was wide, much wider than those on human vessels. Ethan realized that whoever built this ship had been large. Very large. He saw doorways that were at least 3 meters tall, and the ceiling stretched high above his head. As they walked, more lights activated automatically, creating a path through the darkness. Ethan noticed strange interfaces built into the walls. They looked organic somehow, with smooth curves and flowing designs. When he touched one, it lit up with symbols and what might have been diagrams, but he could not understand any of it. They passed through several chambers. One looked like it might have been a cargo bay, vast and empty. Another had rows of what could be equipment or machinery, all silent and still. Everywhere he looked, Ethan saw that same combination of advanced technology and artistic design. This civilization, whatever it was, had valued beauty as much as function. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached a larger corridor that seemed to be a main passage. Sentinel stopped suddenly, its sensors pulsing. "I am detecting significant energy activity ahead. The source is close." They continued forward and entered an enormous chamber. Ethan stopped and stared in amazement. The room was circular and massive, easily 50 meters across. The walls were covered in panels and screens, most of them dark. But in the center of the room stood a raised platform with what looked like a command throne. "This is the bridge," Ethan said quietly. "This is where they controlled the ship." He walked slowly toward the center, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Sentinel followed, constantly scanning. As Ethan approached the command throne, more systems began to activate. Screens flickered to life around the room, displaying star maps and streams of alien text. Holographic displays appeared in the air, showing three-dimensional images that rotated slowly. Ethan climbed the steps to the platform and stood before the throne. It was huge, built for someone at least 3 meters tall. The seat was made from that same dark metal, but it had a strange quality to it. When he touched it, the surface felt almost warm, almost alive. A large screen directly in front of the throne suddenly blazed to life. Ethan jumped back, his hand going to his weapon. But the screen was not showing a threat. It was displaying a star map with one point blinking steadily in red. "Sentinel, are you seeing this?" Ethan asked. "Affirmative. The display is showing a galactic map with a marked coordinate. The location appears to be at the edge of known space." As they watched, the screen changed. Text appeared, flowing across the display in those same alien symbols. The text scrolled for several seconds, then the screen returned to the star map. After a moment, the cycle repeated. Text, then map, then text again. "It's a message," Ethan realized. "This screen has been playing the same message over and over. That's what the energy pulse is. It's broadcasting this message." "For how long?" Sentinel asked. Ethan looked around the bridge, seeing the dust that had settled on some surfaces and the perfect preservation of others. "A very long time. Maybe hundreds of years." He moved closer to the screen, studying the alien text. He could not read it, but he could see patterns. Some symbols repeated. Some appeared in sequences that might be numbers or coordinates. The message was clearly important enough that someone had left this ship here, broadcasting it continuously, waiting for someone to find it. "Can you record everything?" Ethan asked Sentinel. "Every symbol, every image. We need to get this translated." "Already recording," the robot confirmed. "However, translation may be difficult without a reference point. This language appears to be completely unique." Ethan walked around the bridge, examining the other displays. One showed what looked like a fleet of ships, dozens of them, all with the same dark hull design. Another showed a planet, beautiful and blue. A third displayed something that made him uncomfortable. It was an image of space, but something was wrong with it. The stars were disappearing, being swallowed by spreading darkness. He turned back to the main screen, watching the message repeat again. Someone had built this incredible ship. Someone had left it here with power still running and a message still broadcasting. Someone wanted this message to be found. "Who were you?" Ethan whispered to the empty bridge. "And what were you trying to say?" The screen pulsed with its steady rhythm, the alien text flowing past. Somewhere in those symbols was an answer. Somewhere in this ancient ship was a story waiting to be discovered. Ethan knew he had found something far more important than salvage. He had found a mystery that could change everything humanity knew about the galaxy. He looked at Sentinel. "We need to figure out what this message says. Whatever civilization built this ship, they went to a lot of trouble to make sure someone would find it. That means it's important." "Agreed," Sentinel replied. "But decoding an unknown language will require significant processing power and time." Ethan nodded slowly, his mind already working on the problem. "Then we better get started." Ethan sat on the bridge floor with his portable computer spread out before him. For the past 6 hours, he had been trying to find patterns in the alien symbols. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, and his back ached from sitting in one position too long. Beside him, Sentinel stood motionless, processing the massive amount of data they had collected. "There has to be a way to understand this," Ethan muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. Every language has structure. Every writing system has rules. He looked up at the main display, watching the message repeat for what must have been the 1,000th time. The alien text flowed smoothly across the screen, beautiful and completely incomprehensible. He felt like a child trying to read a book written for scholars. Suddenly, Sentinel's optical sensors brightened. Ethan, I may have found something. The ship's computer systems are more sophisticated than I initially believed. There appears to be a secondary interface designed for communication. Ethan scrambled to his feet. Where? Show me. The robot moved to a panel on the left side of the command throne. When Sentinel touched it, the panel came alive with soft light. A moment later, a holographic display appeared in the air above it. The display showed a series of simple images. A star. A planet. A figure that might represent a person. It's a basic communication protocol, Ethan said excitedly. Like the kind we use for first contact with new species. Simple images that any intelligent being could understand. He reached out and touched the image of the star. The display changed immediately, showing more complex images. Mathematical symbols appeared, along with what looked like chemical formulas. Ethan recognized some of them. Basic physics. Universal constants. Things that would be the same anywhere in the galaxy. They built this in, he realized. They knew that whoever found this ship might not speak their language. So they created a teaching system. Over the next hour, Ethan and Sentinel worked through the protocol. The ship's computer was incredibly patient, showing them image after image, building from simple concepts to more complex ones. Numbers became equations. Equations became words. Words became sentences. It was not perfect translation. Many concepts did not match exactly. But slowly, Ethan began to understand. He learned that the ship's builders called themselves the Archons. They had been an ancient civilization, one that existed long before humanity ever left Earth. They had built a vast empire across hundreds of star systems. According to the timeline the computer is showing, Sentinel reported, the Archons disappeared approximately 12,000 years ago. Ethan felt a chill. 12,000 years. When the Archons had been traveling between stars, humans had barely discovered agriculture. They had been an advanced civilization when humanity was still primitive. As they continued working with the interface, the ship's computer began showing them more information. The main screen changed, displaying what looked like historical records. Ethan saw images of the Archons themselves. They were tall, at least 3 meters, with bodies that seemed to be made partially of crystalline material. They were beautiful in a strange, alien way. The records showed their cities, vast and elegant. Their ships, powerful and graceful. Their culture, rich and complex. For thousands of years, the Archons had thrived. They had explored. They had created. They had lived in peace. But then something changed. The images on the screen grew darker. Ethan saw star systems going silent. Planets becoming empty. Ships disappearing without explanation. The Archons had encountered something terrible. The computer displayed a new symbol, one that appeared repeatedly in the following records. Ethan worked to translate it, and when he finally understood, his blood ran cold. The silence, he whispered. They called it the silence. More images appeared. They showed the spreading darkness he had seen before, but now he understood what it meant. The silence was not just empty space. It was something active, something hungry. It moved through the galaxy, consuming everything it touched. Civilizations fell before it. Entire species vanished. And nothing the Archons tried could stop it. Sentinel processed the data quietly. The records indicate that the silence specifically targeted advanced civilizations. Species with complex technology and artificial intelligence were particularly vulnerable. Ethan felt sick. He thought about Earth, about humanity's growing network of AI systems and planetary computers. If the silence still existed somewhere, humanity could be exactly the kind of target it sought. What did they do? He asked the computer desperately. How did they fight it? The display changed again, showing a massive gathering of Archon ships. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, all converging on one location. Ethan watched as the records played out like a story. The Archons had made a desperate plan. They could not destroy the silence, but they discovered they could contain it. Using technology Ethan could barely comprehend, they built a prison of energy in folded space. It took the combined power of their entire civilization, but they succeeded. The silence was trapped, sealed away where it could not spread. But the cost had been enormous. Creating the prison required the Archons to sacrifice themselves. Their ships, their technology, their very life energy had been woven into the barrier. To keep the silence contained, they had to become part of the seal. The records showed the final days. The Archons saying goodbye to their worlds. Ships departing never to return. An entire civilization choosing to end itself to protect the rest of the galaxy from a threat no one else even knew existed. They saved everyone, Ethan said quietly. Every species that came after them. Every civilization that would ever exist. They gave up everything to protect strangers they would never meet. The main screen pulsed again, returning to its repeating message. But now Ethan could read parts of it. It was a warning. A message left for whoever might come after. The Archons wanted future civilizations to know what they had done and why. More importantly, the message contained coordinates. Ethan studied them carefully as Sentinel recorded every detail. These coordinates point to a location far from here, the robot said. Approximately 200 light-years toward the galactic rim. The computer displayed more information about the location. It was an archive station, a repository the Archons had built before their final sacrifice. Inside that station was everything. Their complete history, their scientific knowledge, their culture and art, and most importantly, detailed information about the silence and the prison that held it. They left instructions, Ethan realized. They're telling us where to find their knowledge. They want someone to understand what they did. But there was another part to the message, one that made Ethan's hands shake. The prison was not permanent. The Archons had built it to last for thousands of years, but not forever. Eventually the barriers would weaken. Eventually the silence might escape. The message included a warning about the prison's location and signs to watch for if the containment began to fail. It also hinted that the archive station contained information about maintaining or strengthening the prison. But understanding that information would require accessing the full archives. Ethan sat back, overwhelmed by what he had learned. An ancient civilization had sacrificed itself to save the galaxy. They had left behind a message and a repository of knowledge, hoping someone would find it. And now, 12,000 years later, a human salvager and his robot had stumbled onto their legacy. What do we do? He asked Sentinel. This is bigger than us. Bigger than anything. Do we tell Earth? Do we report this to the authorities? Sentinel was quiet for a moment. That is a difficult question. If we reveal this discovery, many will want to study it. Some may seek the archive station. Others may even search for the prison itself, wanting to understand the silence. And that could be disastrous, Ethan finished. If someone tries to study the silence and accidentally weakens the prison. He thought about it carefully. The Archons had trusted that whoever found their message would be wise enough to handle it properly. They had left the coordinates and the warning, believing that some future species would prove worthy of their sacrifice. Ethan stood and looked around the ancient bridge. This ship had waited here for so long, pulsing out its message into the void. Now that message had finally been received. Now someone finally understood. He made his decision. We don't tell anyone yet. Not until we know more. We go to those coordinates. We find the archive station. We learn everything we can about what the Archons did and how to protect their legacy. That will be dangerous, Sentinel warned. We would be traveling far beyond known space. I know, Ethan replied. But this is too important. The Archons gave up everything to save the galaxy. The least we can do is try to understand their gift. He touched the command throne gently, feeling that strange warmth again. We'll keep your secrets safe, he promised the long-dead Archons. And we'll make sure your sacrifice wasn't in vain. Ethan spent the next 2 days exploring the Archon ship while wrestling with his decision. Every corner he turned, every system he examined, made the choice both clearer and more difficult. The technology surrounding him was incredibly advanced. If he brought this back to Earth, it could change everything. Medical breakthroughs, energy solutions, faster ships, better weapons. The possibilities were endless. But so were the dangers. He stood in what appeared to be a weapons bay, looking at devices he could barely understand. Sentinel scanned one of them carefully, then delivered a sobering assessment. This single weapon contains more destructive power than Earth's largest warship. And there are dozens of them stored here. Ethan touched the smooth casing of the weapon, feeling its cold surface. If the wrong people got hold of this technology, it would shift the balance of power significantly, Sentinel agreed. Wars could be started. Entire planets could be threatened. That was the problem. Ethan knew human nature. He had served in the military during the border conflicts. He had seen how quickly people turn technology into weapons, how easily fear and greed corrupted good intentions. If he reported finding an ancient alien vessel filled with advanced technology, governments and corporations would fight over it. Some would want to study it peacefully. Others would want to weaponize it immediately. And worst of all, someone would inevitably want to find the silence itself. Not to protect the galaxy from it, but to try to study it, to understand it, to potentially control it. Ethan had met men like that during his service. Officers who were so confident in their intelligence that they believed they could handle any threat. Scientists so obsessed with discovery that they ignored obvious dangers. If even one of them learned about the Archon prison and decided to investigate it personally, the results could be catastrophic. He walked back to the bridge, his footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The ship felt lonely. It had been alone for so long, waiting for someone to find it. Now that someone had, what would happen to it? Sentinel followed him silently. The robot had been processing data constantly, running probability calculations and risk assessments. As they entered the bridge, it finally spoke. I have completed my analysis. If you report this discovery to Earth authorities, there is an 87% probability that the ship will be seized by military forces within 6 months. There is a 63% probability that at least one organization will attempt to locate the Archon prison within 2 years. The probability of someone accidentally compromising the containment is difficult to calculate, but it is not zero. Not zero, Ethan repeated bitterly. That's a very polite way of saying we could doom the galaxy. He slumped into the command throne, no longer caring that it was built for someone much larger. His head barely reached the back of the seat. He felt small and overwhelmed, like a child sitting in his father's chair. There's another option, he said quietly. We could keep this secret. Tell no one. Just go to the archive station ourselves. That would require significant preparation, Sentinel observed. This ship appears functional, but we would need to fully activate its systems. We would be traveling beyond mapped space. And we would be alone. Ethan nodded slowly. I know. But isn't that better than the alternative? The Archons left their message for a reason. They wanted someone to find their archives. Maybe they were hoping that whoever found it would be careful. Would be wise enough not to rush in blindly. He stood and walked to the main display, looking at the star map with its blinking coordinates. 200 light years. That was a long journey, even with the Archon ship's faster-than-light drive. His salvage vessel could never make it. But this ship could, if he could figure out how to fly it. What about your life on Earth? Sentinel asked. You have friends? Contacts? A business? Ethan laughed without humor. What business? I barely make enough to keep my ship running. My friends are other salvagers who I see once every few months. And my family. He trailed off. His parents were dead. He had a sister somewhere, but they had not spoken in years. I don't have much tying me down. He turned to face Sentinel. What about you? You're military property technically. If I take this ship and disappear, they'll list you as stolen. You'll be marked as a fugitive. Sentinel's optical sensors focused on him steadily. I have been decommissioned for 5 years. No one has checked on my status in all that time. I doubt anyone would notice my absence. The robot paused. And even if they did, I would choose to stay with you. We are partners. Ethan felt warmth spread through his chest. Sentinel was right. They were partners. More than that, they were friends. The robot had started as just a tool, but years of working together had created something deeper. Trust. Loyalty. Maybe even affection, though Ethan was not sure robots could feel that. All right then, he said, making his decision final. We do this together. We keep the ship secret. We go to the archive station. We learn everything the Archons wanted us to know. But there was still the practical problem of covering their tracks. Ethan's salvage ship was registered. People knew he was working the Arcturus graveyard. If he simply disappeared, questions would be asked. Searches might be conducted. Someone might eventually find the Archon ship. He spent the next several hours crafting a plan. First, he would pilot his salvage ship away from the Archon vessel and stage a reactor failure. Not a real one, but enough sensor noise and debris to make it look convincing. He would send out a distress call, then use his escape pod to evacuate. The pod would be set to drift toward the nearest shipping lane where it would eventually be found. Meanwhile, he would actually return to the Archon ship. The authorities would assume he died in the explosion. His ship's black box would show a reactor malfunction. There would be an investigation, but it would conclude that he had been another salvager who pushed his luck too far. It's not perfect, he admitted to Sentinel. But it should work. No one will look for a dead man. You would be erasing your identity, Sentinel pointed out. You could never return to human space. Never contact anyone from your previous life. Ethan thought about that. It was a heavy price. But then he looked around the bridge at the advanced technology that surrounded him. He thought about the Archons and their sacrifice. They had given up everything, their entire civilization, to protect species they would never meet. What was his small life compared to that? What was one human's identity compared to the safety of the galaxy? The Archons spent 12,000 years waiting for someone to find their message, he said. They trusted that whoever found it would do the right thing. I can't let them down. Over the next day, Ethan prepared everything. He transferred his personal belongings from his salvage ship to the Archon vessel. He carefully programmed the reactor failure sequence. He recorded a final message that would be found with his escape pod, making it sound like he knew the end was coming. The hardest part was writing a letter to his sister. He had not spoken to her in 3 years, not since their argument about their parents' estate. But he wanted her to have some closure. He wrote carefully, telling her he was sorry for the distance between them. He told her he hoped she was happy. He did not tell her the truth about where he was going. Sentinel helped him move supplies aboard the Archon ship. Food, water, medical supplies, spare parts. They had no idea how long the journey would take or what they would find at the archive station. It was better to be over-prepared. Finally, everything was ready. Ethan stood in the airlock of his old salvage ship, looking back at the familiar controls and worn seats. This ship had been his home for 5 years. It had kept him alive through radiation storms and debris fields. Now he was abandoning it. Goodbye, old friend, he whispered. You deserve better than this. He climbed into the escape pod and sealed the hatch. With one final command, he activated the reactor failure sequence. Alarms blared throughout the ship. He launched the pod and watched through the small window as his salvage vessel began venting plasma and debris. The distress beacon activated automatically. Within hours, someone would pick up the signal. They would find the escape pod drifting, its occupant long dead from oxygen deprivation. They would find the destroyed ship and conclude that another salvager had met an unfortunate end. Sentinel retrieved him in a small shuttle craft they had found aboard the Archon ship. As they flew back toward the ancient vessel, Ethan took one last look at the debris field behind them. Somewhere in that tangle of metal was his old life, his old identity. Ethan Price the salvager was dead. But someone new was being born. Someone who carried the knowledge of the Archons. Someone who would seek their archives and protect their legacy. He did not know what to call this new person yet. But as the Archon ship's airlock opened to receive them, he felt certain of one thing. This was the right choice. The only choice. Whatever waited for them at those distant coordinates, whatever secrets the archive held, they would face it together. The Archons had trusted someone to find their message and handle it wisely. Ethan intended to prove worthy of that trust. The bridge of the Archon ship hummed with quiet power as systems activated one by one. Ethan sat in the command throne, feeling small in the seat designed for beings twice his size. But the ship's interface had adapted to him. When he touched the controls, they responded smoothly, as if the ancient vessel understood its new purpose. Sentinel stood beside him, connected directly to the ship's computer through a data cable. The robot had spent days learning the Archon systems, translating their functions into something Ethan could understand. Now, as they prepared for departure, Sentinel served as interpreter between human and machine. All primary systems are operational, the robot reported. Life support is stable. The faster-than-light drive is charging. Hull integrity is at 98%. Ethan shook his head in amazement. This ship sat buried under debris for who knows how long, and it's still in better condition than most vessels in active service. The Archons built things to last, Sentinel observed. Their engineering philosophy prioritized longevity over all other factors. This ship was designed to wait for thousands of years if necessary. And it had waited. The vessel had a name Ethan had discovered. In the Archon language it was called something that translated roughly to Eternal Vigil. The name was fitting. The ship had been a guardian, keeping watch, broadcasting its warning into the void until someone finally answered. Now that vigil was ending. Or perhaps transforming. Ethan was not abandoning the mission the Archons had set. He was continuing it, taking the next step in their plan. He pulled up the star map on the main display. The coordinates the Archons had left were clearly marked, a small point of light in the vast darkness of space. The archive station waited there 200 light-years away. At conventional speeds, the journey would take decades. But the Eternal Vigil's faster-than-light drive could make the trip in weeks. Are you certain about this course of action? Sentinel asked. It was not the first time the robot had posed the question. Once we depart, there will be no turning back. Your staged death will be accepted as fact. You will cease to exist in human records. Ethan considered the question seriously. It deserved a serious answer. I'm certain, he said finally. Someone has to do this. Someone has to protect what the Archons left behind. If not me, then who? He thought about the alternatives. Governments would fight over the technology. Corporations would try to profit from it. Military forces would weaponize it. And somewhere, some overconfident fool would decide to investigate the silence directly, convinced they could handle something that had destroyed an entire civilization. Better that I disappear, he continued. Better that the eternal vigil remains a ghost story. Just another energy signature that turned out to be nothing. Over the past week, Ethan had carefully constructed his false report. He described finding the energy signature, investigating it thoroughly, and discovering it was just a reactor echo, a common phenomenon in old graveyards where power cores continued generating small amounts of energy long after their ships were destroyed. His report was boring and technical, exactly the kind of thing that would be filed away and forgotten. No one would come looking. The Arcturus graveyard was dangerous and mostly picked clean. Other salvagers would avoid the area where Ethan Price had died. The eternal vigil would remain hidden beneath its blanket of debris, and eventually even that debris would drift apart and disperse. Final systems check, Ethan said, pushing away his doubts. Let's make sure this ship is ready to fly. Sentinel ran through the checklist methodically. Engines, weapons, shields, navigation, communications, life support. Every system reported ready. The eternal vigil had been sleeping for thousands of years, but it was awakening now, responding to its new crew with surprising eagerness. Ethan placed his hands on the control interface. The Archon command system was not like human technology. There were no buttons or switches. Instead, the controls responded to thought and touch, reading his intentions through neural sensors built into the throne's armrests. It had taken days to learn. At first, Ethan's thoughts had been too scattered, and the ship had responded erratically. But Sentinel had helped him focus, teaching him to think clearly and precisely about what he wanted the ship to do. Now the interface felt almost natural. Initiating launch sequence, Ethan said. The Eternal Vigil's engines came to life with a deep, resonant hum. It was unlike any sound Ethan had ever heard from a human ship. There was no roar, no violence. Just a smooth, powerful vibration that seemed to harmonize with the structure of the ship itself. Through the viewscreen, Ethan watched as debris began to shift. The ship's gravitational systems pushed away the wreckage that had covered it for so long. Metal groaned and twisted as tons of destroyed vessels were gently moved aside. Light from distant stars touched the Eternal Vigil's hull for the first time in millennia. We are clear of the debris field, Sentinel reported. All systems nominal. The ship is ready for faster-than-light transition. Ethan took a deep breath. This was the moment. Once they jumped, there would be no going back. He would be committed to this path completely. He thought about the Archons one last time. They had been a great civilization, powerful and wise. They had built wonders and explored the galaxy. And when faced with an impossible threat, they had made the ultimate sacrifice. They had given up everything to save countless species they would never meet. What would they think of him, he wondered? A simple human salvager, taking on the responsibility they had left behind. Would they approve? Would they be disappointed that only one person had found their message? Or would they understand that sometimes great tasks fell to ordinary people? That heroes were not always the powerful and famous, but sometimes just those who happened to be in the right place and chose to do the right thing? Engage the faster-than-light drive, Ethan commanded. The Eternal Vigil responded instantly. Space around the ship began to shimmer and fold. Ethan felt a strange sensation as if reality itself was bending. The stars on the viewscreen elongated, becoming streams of light. And then, with a sensation like stepping through a curtain, they were no longer in normal space. The journey had begun. Ethan settled back in the command throne, watching the impossible colors of faster-than-light travel flow past. According to the ship's calculations, they would reach the archive coordinates in 23 days. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to think about what they might find. Tell me about the archives again, he said to Sentinel. The robot accessed the information they had gleaned from the Eternal Vigil's computer. The Archon Archive Station was built as a repository of their entire civilization. History, science, art, culture, everything they had learned in 10,000 years of existence. It was placed at the edge of their territory, deliberately isolated from their main population centers. Why? The records suggest they were concerned about catastrophic events. Wars, natural disasters, or other threats that might destroy their core worlds. The archive was meant to survive even if everything else was lost. Ironic, Ethan thought. The Archons had built the archive to preserve their legacy if disaster struck. They had never imagined that they themselves would be the disaster, that they would have to sacrifice their entire civilization. But because of their foresight, their knowledge had survived them. What do you think we will find there? Ethan asked. Sentinel was quiet for a moment, processing. Unknown. The station has been abandoned for 12,000 years. It may have suffered damage. It may have been discovered by other species. Or it may be exactly as the Archons left it, waiting patiently like this ship. Ethan hoped it was the latter. He hoped the archive was intact and accessible. Because somewhere in that vast collection of knowledge was information humanity desperately needed. Not just scientific advances or technological blueprints, but wisdom. Understanding. The story of a civilization that had faced the ultimate test and passed it. We should establish a routine, Sentinel suggested. 3 weeks is a long time. You will need to eat, sleep, and exercise regularly to maintain your health. Ethan smiled. Even now, Sentinel was looking after him. You're right. And I should spend time learning more about the ship's systems. If something goes wrong, I need to know how to handle it. They settled into a pattern over the following days. Ethan would wake, eat breakfast while reviewing Archon language lessons, then spend hours working with Sentinel to understand the ship's systems. The Eternal Vigil was complex beyond anything humanity had built, but it was also surprisingly intuitive. The Archons had designed it to be operated by a full crew, but it could adapt to a smaller team if necessary. In his free time, Ethan explored the ship. He found living quarters designed for the tall Archons, with furniture and fixtures he could barely reach. He found recreational areas with games and entertainment he could not understand. He found a garden chamber where plants had long since died, leaving only dried husks and empty soil. Each discovery reminded him of what had been lost. The Archons had been people not so different from humans in many ways. They had worked and played. They had created beauty. They had lived lives full of meaning and purpose. And they had given it all up. On the 15th day of the journey, Ethan stood before a memorial wall he had discovered in one of the ship's corridors. It displayed thousands of names in flowing Archon script. The crew of the Eternal Vigil, he realized. Every person who had served aboard this vessel before it was left as a beacon. They knew what they were doing, he said softly. Every one of them chose this. They could have run away, could have tried to save themselves. But they stayed. The Archons valued duty above survival, Sentinel observed. Their culture emphasized responsibility to others, even at great personal cost. Ethan traced his fingers over one of the names. I hope I can live up to that. I hope we both can. The days continued to pass. Ethan grew more comfortable with the ship, and the ship seemed to grow more comfortable with him. The interface responded more quickly to his commands. The systems anticipated his needs. It was as if the Eternal Vigil was accepting him, recognizing him as its new guardian. On the 23rd day, the ship's computer alerted them that they were approaching the destination coordinates. Ethan rushed to the bridge, his heart pounding. After weeks of travel, they were finally about to discover what the Archons had left for them. The Eternal Vigil dropped out of faster-than-light travel smoothly. Space returned to normal, stars becoming points of light instead of streaks. And there, directly ahead, was something Ethan had not dared to hope for. A station. Massive and elegant, built in the same style as the Eternal Vigil. It hung in space like a work of art, its hull gleaming despite the millennia that had passed. And from its surface, faint lights still glowed. The archive station, Sentinel confirmed. It appears to be operational. Ethan stared at it, feeling tears prick his eyes. The Archons had built this place to outlast them. They had poured their knowledge and their legacy into it. And it had survived. For 12,000 years, it had waited in the darkness, keeping their memories alive. Take us in, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. Let's see what they left for us. As the Eternal Vigil approached the archive station, Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. He was no longer just a salvager who had stumbled onto something important. He was a keeper now. A guardian of an ancient legacy. The Archons had trusted that someone would come. Someone would find their message, understand their sacrifice, and carry their knowledge forward. That someone was him. We won't let you down, Ethan promised the ghosts of the long-dead Archons. Your vigil is over. Ours is just beginning.